and welcome once again to another special edition of Beverly's Times Past. My name is Ed Josephs, and tonight our guest is Richard W. Symmes of North Beverly. Rich was with us on an earlier program, and welcome to the show, Rich.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
We had great fun in going over some 35 or 6 photographs of the pre-Route 128 days of North Beverly, and we've brought along another 30 or so today to look at and to talk a little bit about. I'd like to, first of all, acknowledge the fact that you are a true native of North Beverly. You were born there?
That's right.
Raised on Cabot Street?
That's right.
And now you are living presently?
On Frankwood Avenue, which is right across from the shopping plaza there opposite that on Dodge Street.
Okay, so you've seen everything there is to see in your 40-odd years of living up in that area.
Uh-huh.
I thought we might begin the program this evening talking a little bit about the history of Route 128, because that really was the great change that came about up in that area when Route 128 was built. Things began to change quite rapidly up in your neighborhood. So perhaps, Rich, we could start with a little bit of the early history of Route 128.
Sure. It's one of the first things I remember, actually, because I was about 5 years old when they were building it next to our house, and I mean absolutely right next to our house. There was a bridge constructed, as you know, right over Cabot Street, and that bridge, of course, involved tons and tons of concrete, and they had to build the forms for that, and they were built in a little shed that they constructed next to my father's property. So I got to see all of that, and it was a fascinating thing when you were 5 years old to watch something of that magnitude. It went on for about 2.5 years, day and night.
Mm-hmm. The idea for the road, according to what I've read, really was conceived back in the 30s. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there was a good hunk of it somewhat west of Beverly that was built before World War II. I know there was a couple of bridges over in the Danvers and Peabody area that certainly looked that old. They were the Art Deco style concrete bridges, and I think that was done before the war. And then, of course, the war stopped everything, and it didn't resume until after that. Following
World War II, in about 1946, construction really began in earnest up and around the North Beverly area, as we will see in some of our photographs here. And then it began to hopscotch, Rich, a little bit down toward Gloucester.
Yeah, they went down to, I think, around Essex Street, Route 22, in one burst. And it stayed there for a while, and then it picked up and went on down to, I guess, Manchester in that area, and then finally down to Gloucester. And then it didn't go any further than that for quite a while. And the last go-down was the little piece between the Gloucester Rotary and Rockport, which is basically only a 2-lane road, even today.
Yeah. What was the purpose of building this road?
Actually, I think the whole idea was to have a big semicircle around Boston, about 20 miles out. And what that did was make a wheel, which if Boston is the hub, and that's what it's always been called, then the spokes radiating out from the hub were the roads like old Route 1, and then later on Route 93 and Route 2 and some of these other ones, and this tied those roads together in a big semicircle about 20 miles outside of Boston. And it was known, at least casually, as the Circumferential Highway because it made a circumference around Boston. And its real name, of course, is the Yankee Division Highway, named after the Massachusetts 26th Infantry National Guard Division.
Later on, of course, Route 495 was built in the same fashion.
That's right, and that's another 20 miles or so further out beyond Route 128, but again, it makes another semicircle, so we have 2 semicircles outside of Boston, 20 miles out, and then another 20 miles out, approximately.
Yeah. And of course, before the coming of Route 128, North Beverly was much, much different than we see it today.
It was very, very rural. Agriculture was the chief occupation up there, I would say, and coming hard on the construction of 128 was massive housing developments and shopping plazas and all the rest of what we know today.
Right. You made a great comparison to me, comparing it to the coming of the railroad in the old days.
Yeah, it sort of could be looked at that way because, you know, it allowed you to go from here to there very quickly, very easily. The railroad basically took you from Beverly into Boston, and then if you wanted to go somewhere else, you had to go from Boston back out again. Whereas this took you in a direct line from one place to another all the way around to the South Shore,
right,
without having to go into Boston at all.
And people and businesses naturally flocked around the area,
sure,
causing, of course, the great change that we're about to see here in these pictures.
That's right.
Okay, why don't we get at them right now?
Okay.
Okay, we have here, to lead off here, we have an aerial view of the central North Beverly area about the early 1950s. Rich.
And you can see, looking at this picture, which is kind of a nice establishing shot of the area, looking down on what was known as Foster's Corner, which we covered in the earlier program. The fire station and the junction of routes 1A and 97 are prominent in the lower left center of the picture. And then as you get over toward the right side, you can see 128. You can see the southbound, or rather the eastbound exit and entrance ramps of 128 onto Dodge Street. And as you look up toward the upper right, you can see the fields and so forth associated with the area up around Cherry Hill Farm at the top right of the photograph. And over in the top left is the fields that were associated with the Raymond Farm, which of course also became a housing development about that time.
Yeah. You know, today there are just many houses up in that Raymond.
That's
Raymond
right.
Farm area.
That, of course, is all houses up in this area here, and of course the Cherry Hill Farm is now an industrial park.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next photograph here. We have here a building on Route, well, they're building Route 128 over Cabot Street is what they're doing, and we're looking down in your neighborhood.
Yeah, this is looking up Cabot Street from just a little below where the bridge carries 128 over it. And again, this is the bridge that was built next to the house where we lived when I was a child. And so I remember all of that pouring of the concrete and everything firsthand. And I think one thing that stands out in my mind is watching the bulldozers that used to climb up the grade. It was about maybe a 45-degree angle up that slope as they filled in the grade on both sides of the bridge, and they used to run bulldozers up and down that. And why they didn't roll over is beyond me, but I was fascinated to watch those big machines crawl up those hillsides like that while they graded those fills.
Yeah. Now this picture dates about 1946, and the overpass here is really a granite facade.
Yeah, because the bridge, as was the one on Dodge Street, was built of poured concrete into forms, and then they faced it with granite, just a rather thin, maybe a 5 or 6 inch thick granite blocks, decorative granite stone. And it really gives a nice decorative effect, which they, for the most part, don't bother to do anymore when they build roads.
Yeah. What do you see in the new photograph as we now look at it of 1991?
Well, the photograph that we see today, and again we're looking from down the street, looking in the same general direction, things have basically stayed the same at this particular part of town because there's been no housing that was built in there. There was no room for any. All the housing was built to the north of this site. And the picture that we see here shows the large building on the right, which was an apartment house made from an old barn that was in Ludden's Field in the early days, and it's called The Block.
Okay. Next. Okay, we have here a picture showing them constructing Route 128 actually over the B&M Railroad.
That's right. And if you notice the spacing on both the left and the right side of the central arch here as it's covering the railroad tracks, they left room for additional passage of either roads or whatever on each side of that railroad right-of-way. And it's rather interesting because now obviously you have Tozier Road that goes under the one on the right side as we're looking at it here, looking northbound. And there's still space for another road on the left side if they ever wanted to do something over there. But I find that interesting that they actually left that space without having to tear that bridge out.
Yeah. Now this 1947 picture that we're looking at, we are actually right now sitting just a few hundred yards away from where this picture was taken, right across the street from the Tozier Road studios here. Anything changed in the 1991 photograph?
Not really, no, because other than the roadbed has been upgraded somewhat. As you can see, it's been all welded rail has been installed here and brand new ballast, but other than that, that's about it. Even the signal is in the same location.
Okay. Next, we have a picture here dated 1940, thereabouts, and it's the field between Dodge and Cabot Streets. Rich?
Yeah, this is right behind the area where the fire station is today, and looking up toward Conant Street and across the fields where Route 128 presently is situated. And these were just basically gardens that people had in there. They're just digging the ground here, probably digging potatoes, I would think, by the looks of it. And in the background on the left side, you can see one of the Glines' greenhouses still standing there. And the Ludden farm would have been probably up there in that grove of trees on the right side of the field. And of course, that house was moved to make way for Route 128 too.
Yeah. Today, if you took the same picture, you would not recognize the area, this particular.
You probably couldn't even get in and take that same angle because there's so much stuff in back there now.
House lots and what have you. Yeah. It's amazing.
It is. It really is.
Okay, next. Here we see they're beginning construction on the Route 128 bridge, which went over Cabot Street, and this picture dates about 1944 or 45.
I would say that's about right because they're just starting the form work for the two towers on the east side of Cabot Street. We're looking west in this shot, basically toward Cherry Hill. And these forms were constructed out of wood that was cut and sized in this little sawmill that was right next to the house where I was growing up. And once they got these things all constructed, then they poured the concrete into them, and you had the four towers. And then from that, they built the forms to actually make the arch across the road.
Okay. This would be Ludden's Meadow we're looking at?
This is the back side of it. This was a sort of a swampy area where you could skate in the wintertime. It sort of flooded out, and there was all peat moss underneath that, which made it very unstable. They had to truck lots and lots of that out of there in order to get a firm base for these cement abutments for the bridge.
There was a family by the name of Ludden, obviously.
Yeah, they were over on Dodge Street.
Dodge Street. Okay. Moving right along here, we have another picture here of Route 128 under construction. This dates from about 1946. And when I first saw this picture, I was fascinated by the little tree in the road, as we can see it.
Yeah, that would have been down on Ellsworth Avenue.
Yep, yep. And today, as we look at the new picture here, or the 1991 version, as close as we could get to that area, we can see some similarities, but again, things, of course, have changed over the last 35 and 40 years.
Basically, what you're looking at in the new picture is the fact that you've got a Jersey barrier running down the center of the road, and you've got a guardrail that's been built up that blocks what used to be a little sidewalk that ran over the bridge, although I don't know why they ever built one there. To my knowledge, nobody ever walked along 128, but they used to have a sidewalk when that bridge was first built on either side of it. So we're basically looking down toward Ellsworth Avenue, which, of course, 128 bisected and cut in half. They didn't bother to build another bridge down there because they figured it wasn't worth it.
Right. I want to tell you, while I was up there taking this picture here, I did not feel very secure. Those cars were going by me about 2 feet away, 65 miles an hour. Yeah. So there really isn't any room up there to walk.
No,
people
not at all.
Shouldn't be up there at all.
Nope. No, not at all. It's not safe.
Yeah, and I was going across the road to take a picture looking down onto your old house across the way, and with two Jersey barriers to leap over, I decided discretion was the better point here.
Right.
We went down below and took the picture.
Yeah, much better idea.
Okay. We have next the picture that, let's see here. Okay, this is Route 128 bridge over Cabot Street, right, looking down, is it?
Yeah, and this is sort of a continuation of the picture just before the one we were last looking at, and it shows the towers on either side, the abutments pretty much finalized, and they haven't started to build the arch as yet across the roadway, across Cabot Street. Again, we're looking west in the general direction of Cherry Hill, which would be up here in the background on the upper right corner. The house I grew up in is in the center, and this little shed in the foreground there is actually the lumber mill, we'll call it, that they used to cut up all the lumber and make the forms, which they poured the concrete into for these huge abutments and for the bridge span itself.
And you were a witness to all of this.
Oh yeah, five years old.
Looked right out your bedroom window and could see the whole thing going.
Fascinating stuff.
Going right up. Great. Okay. From Route 128, looking toward Conant Street, dated 1950.
Yes, this is good because even though it doesn't look like too much as you first look at it, it shows the area that used to abound with greenhouses. There were Glines greenhouses and Caldwell's greenhouses. We're looking from basically behind the fire station, and we're looking across the fields where now Chipman Road is, behind the old Brown School. And in the distance you can see